Welcome back to Boilers and Beyond. I'm Jordan Jones. On the last episode, we looked back at the last 25 years of Purdue basketball. As we celebrate the quarter century mark here of the 21st century, we're going to do the same today, talking about Purdue football. It's been a little bit different of a story than Purdue basketball. It's been quite a roller coaster with now 6 head coaches, right? 6 head coaches since the turn of the century. We're going to go through it all today, from the Rose Bowl to 1-11 seasons, from Tiller to Odom and everything in between. Let's do it. If you don't already, be sure to follow the show on Twitter at Boilers Beyond. Talking sports there all the time. You can always submit questions. Do that on Twitter at Boilers Beyond. Or you can email the show, boilersandbeyondpod@gmail.com. And be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss a thing. We're only a few weeks away from the Countdown to Kickoff series ramping up. You're not going to want to miss a thing as we get ready for the debut of Barry Odom. Look, over the last 25 years, Purdue basketball has been the model of consistency and stability. And Purdue football has been anything but that. And to be frank, there have been more downs than ups over the last 25 years. But it didn't start that way. 2000 was really the shining star of Purdue seasons. When you look back at the lifespan of most people listening to this is the season that is the golden star of what you remember from Purdue football. Yes, there was the stretch in the 1960s when Purdue was ranked number 1 in the country, when Purdue was very nationally relevant, when it went to a Rose Bowl and won. You go way back when there was the quote-unquote national championship team, and what was that, 1941? But in the modern era, this is when Purdue had its best year, and the way that season played out is absolutely fascinating. Kind of like we talked about with a couple of years ago when Purdue went to the national title game, how that was the year for Purdue to go do something. This was the year for Purdue football because it was Drew Brees' senior year, and he had really made a name for himself between 1998 and 1999. He was on the map as a Heisman frontrunner coming into the season, and he was in the mix all season. He had a really good group of pass catchers. You look at Vinny Sutherland, John Standiford, Tim Stratton, Seth Morales, and he probably had the best offensive line in Purdue history. You look at Matt Light, you look at Nick Hardwick, you look at Chucky Okobe, a few other guys on there. Kelly Kitchell, as good of an offensive line as Purdue has probably ever had. It's not always been a position of strength for Purdue, as has been well documented on this program over the last 5 seasons. God, we've been doing this for a while now. On that team, Purdue had a younger defense, but it was a talented one. A number of future pros on that defense. Some really, really good players. The schedule was challenging, though, and it hit Purdue quickly. Purdue lost 2 games in September. And it goes to show you how strange that season was, because if you look at the history of the Big Ten, and it looks completely different since the college football playoff has been implemented and bowl selections are done very differently. But how many Big Ten teams have gone to the Rose Bowl with multiple losses? How many have gone with 3 regular season losses? That's what this Purdue team did. But 2 losses in September. It should have won at Notre Dame, a game it really should have won. It loses at Penn State. I believe that was the original whiteout. I'm not positive. I know the original whiteout was a Purdue game. I just can't remember if it was that year. So Purdue really put itself behind the 8 ball because in October, it had to play Michigan, it had to go to Northwestern, who was ranked and ended up being a Big Ten co-champion that year. It had to go to Wisconsin, and it hosted Ohio State. Purdue swept all 4. 3 of them in beyond dramatic fashion. Big Ten Network has a wonderful little half-hour documentary about this season. I mean, it's nuts. You have Purdue losing big at halftime against Michigan at home, and the season was falling away. Purdue comes back. Travis Dorsch misses a game-winning field goal. He gets redemption and hits a game-winning field goal, and then infamously tells the student section what he's thinking about them. You have Purdue blocking a kick and returning it for a touchdown in overtime at Wisconsin. And then you have Drew Brees hitting Seth Morales for the Holy Toledo play after throwing an interception a minute or two prior that cost Purdue the lead. You look at how that month played out, it's not possible to imagine a more dramatic month. It's not possible to imagine a more exhilarating month if you're a Purdue fan. Just remarkable how that played out. And even though Purdue had a bye coming off that, and then it lays an egg up at Michigan State, a John L. Smith Michigan State team, I believe. Maybe that was Saban. Nah, I don't think so. I don't think that was Saban. I think he'd already left. Purdue lays an egg at Michigan State, but it rolls past Indiana. It gets some help. Northwestern loses a game, and Purdue punches a ticket to Pasadena with an 8-3 record. It does say something about the state of the Big Ten at that time, where Ohio State was far from what Ohio State is now. I believe that was the year John Cooper got fired there, and Ohio State really ratcheted things up when Jim Tressel replaced him. Michigan was good, but it was not otherworldly. Penn State was in a bit of a downturn under Joe Paterno. He had a bit of a second wind there at the end, but this wasn't a great time for Penn State. But it also shows where Joe Tiller was able to make such an impact. At that point in time, most of the dominant programs in the Big Ten, really most of the programs in the Big Ten, were big. At that point, big was still the thing in football. Yeah, speed was great, but size was everything. This was still the days of 4-3 defenses, or being king, even a 4-4 defense. This is still the days of your 12 and your 22 personnel, where fullbacks played a role and you had multiple tight ends. And hey, listen, I long for those days too. That's fun football to me. But at that point, a lot of the Big Ten was playing big, and Purdue was spreading the ball around. Purdue was moving it around, the basketball on grass mantra. Purdue was trying to do things to really take advantage of other teams' weaknesses. On defense, Purdue was a little bit smaller, but Purdue was going to pressure the passer. And you saw Purdue pump out some really good defensive ends, even from that Rose Bowl team, because Purdue was playing things a little differently. Brock Spack was a really nice defensive coordinator during this era, and Purdue was able to find its niche. And when you look at what Purdue has done, and the other times it's been successful, it's done things a little bit differently than its competition. It's been harder to prepare for. It's been able to exploit some weaknesses. That season, going to a Rose Bowl was such a massive deal for Purdue, and it's a wonderful celebration for fans. You go around on a game day now, and you still see people with Rose Bowl flags. You still see people wearing Rose Bowl t-shirts. Guys, it's been 25 years, and you still see this stuff. This year will be the 25th anniversary. I wouldn't be surprised if you see a tribute at some point. Does Purdue bring back the helmets? I don't know, but I bet you see a tribute of some kind, because that was a really big deal. It was 34 years between visits, from January 1st of 67 to January 1st of 01. And now it's been 25 years, and with the college football playoff being what it is now, where the Rose Bowl is a quarterfinal game, it's out of Purdue's control to the, for the most part, whether it ever gets back. It would have to win the Big Ten and get a first round bye and be slotted there, or play its way to the Rose Bowl. Purdue's a long cry from that. But from that point on, as you look at the 25 years here, as Purdue's quarterback play went, so did Purdue. It's not impossible to succeed without good quarterback play. There are programs in the Big Ten that have had success without being tremendously dynamic on offense. But at Purdue, that's how it's been. And you saw that with the 2001 and 2002 teams because those defenses were still nasty. They really were. You had a lot of pro guys during this era. From 2000 to the late 2000s, Purdue put a lot of guys in the NFL. Jeff Brom's program and some of the guys he brought in have led a little resurgence there. But for the most part, that was a time when Purdue had more NFL guys than it's ever had. And you saw it on these defenses. But the quarterback play remained inconsistent. You had the Brandons, Brandon Hance and Brandon Kirsch. And those guys played some roles. Kyle Orton was the one who became the guy out of that stretch. He dealt with some injuries in 2002. But Purdue was not able to be consistent at the quarterback position for the most part. And you see Purdue go 6-5 in 2021, 6-6 in 2002. I mean, it's not great. It's not great at all. You'd have liked to be better with some of those defenses, but Purdue was making bowl games. And at this time, Purdue wasn't really losing, it wasn't really losing to programs it wasn't supposed to. Purdue was pretty consistent. Purdue had some good non-conference wins during this time. Purdue won an opener at Cincinnati in 2001. Was 2002 when Purdue beat Wake Forest maybe, or Arizona? I'd have to look back. I don't have it in front of me right now, but there were some good wins during this time. And Purdue continued its bowl streak. And going into 2003, I think that might be the best team Purdue had under Joe Tiller. It didn't go to the Rose Bowl. I think this might have been Purdue's best team. It just didn't have Drew Brees. It had Kyle Orton, who was good, but was not good to that level. You had a really good receiving tandem, John Standiford and Taylor Stubblefield. That was big time. Those are two of the leading receivers in Purdue history. Gerard Void, nice running back at that time. Joey Harris, I believe, was suspended that year. Can't remember, but you had a good offense and you still had a loaded defense. That was a group of dudes that Purdue had on that team. And it's sad, but a season-opening loss to Bowling Green, of all teams, is what really held that Purdue team back. It was the year after Urban Meyer left, so it was the first game since Urban Meyer left for the Utah job. And they came into West Lafayette and beat Purdue by 1. That was the last time Purdue wore gold uniforms for a long time. If you want to see the worst of Purdue uniforms, go back and look at the gold uniforms that Purdue had in 2002, man. Whew, they were rough. For that Ohio State Holy Buckeye game at Ross-Ade, my goodness, did Purdue look bad. There was a bowl game where Purdue wore all gold helmets, jerseys, and pants. Oh, just an awful look. Purdue really doesn't need to do gold jerseys in football, because when they brought those back in 21 for that Minnesota game, they looked horrible. But nonetheless, 2003 Purdue was really good. Purdue lost decisively in the Big House to a Michigan team that ended up winning the conference, and Purdue lost an overtime heartbreaker at the Horseshoe. That team was close. I mean, you look at it, you're a point against Bowling Green and some overtime luck against Ohio State from having a 10-1 season and maybe going back to Pasadena, maybe playing for a national championship. I don't know. But that team was really close. That team was really good. But it lost to Georgia in the Capital One Bowl, and it ended things on another sour note. I believe that was an overtime game. Purdue had, the 99 season and the 03 season both ended with just harsh losses to Georgia in Florida bowl games. But 2004 came in, and it brought great optimism because you had Kyle Orton. And the Kyle Orton for Heisman campaign was on. And he had Taylor Stubblefield, and that's a heck of a place to start. Taylor Stubblefield was an All-American in 2004. He was excellent. But Purdue raced to a 5-0 start. It got off to a wonderful start. It won at Penn State in September. It won at Notre Dame in September and had the famous Taylor Stubblefield 97-yard touchdown, I believe, doing the boiler up before he even hit midfield. Purdue throttled Notre Dame beneath the Golden Dome. It's the last time Purdue won in South Bend. And Purdue was 5-0. It got to number 5 in the country. It hosted College Game Day. And then I think most of you know where it goes from here. There's a lot made of that fumble, as there should be, because it's so symbolic. Was Kyle Orton's face mask being pulled? Yes, it was. Was it wise for him to keep running? No, it was not. There's a lot from that one play. But when Purdue lost to Wisconsin that night, it was the last moment, to this day, that Purdue was truly in the national mix. It's had games that, got people talking about Purdue. It's certainly had monumental wins. But since that time, since October of 2004, Purdue has not been, a top 10 team. Purdue has not been on the map, so to speak, in the national conversation. Because of the following week, Purdue loses another close home game to Michigan. I think it was a late fumble that sealed the deal. And then it went to a mediocre Northwestern team and lost. I was actually at that game, and I this was like the first Purdue season that I really remember living through. But yeah, Kyle Orton got hurt. Brandon Kirsch came in. Purdue loses at a bad Northwestern team. Then it loses by 2 against Iowa. So you add it all up. Purdue finishes strong. It beats Ohio State at home. It beats Indiana at home. Maybe it beat Illinois in there. I can't remember. It beat someone else. It finishes the regular season with a 7-4 record. And the losses were by a combined 10 points. That's rough. That's brutal, man. That's absolutely brutal. But the offense fell off a cliff when Kyle Orton wasn't 100%. And, Purdue goes to a Sun Bowl. It loses to Arizona State. And it just concluded the year on a really underwhelming note. One that had a lot of promise. One that had people really excited about Purdue. And, kind of ironically, it was when Purdue basketball was really struggling. So it got people excited. But a really disappointing end to that era. It made it 8 bowls in 8 years for Joe Tiller, though. And it was something to hang your hat on. The issue was that the back half of 2004 was a sign of things to come. Purdue still had good players. In 2005, Purdue had good players. But this is when things really started to feel like they were coming apart. Purdue started 2-0. It beat Akron. It went out to Arizona and won. And then things fell apart. It got blown out under the lights at home to Notre Dame. It just fell apart. Purdue loses 6 in a row. Curtis Painter got some action as a true freshman. That helped Purdue get to three more wins and finish 5-6. A lot of drama. The Ray Edwards, Bernard Pollard stuff got pretty ugly there. You just had a lot of stuff stockpiling at this point. Like 2006 was a better year. Purdue went 8-6 overall, but at no point did it feel great. I remember so well, living with my dad and him being such a big Purdue fan during all of this, and being a young sports fan who was as rabid as any elementary schooler could be at this point. But I just remember the vibe around him and his friends that we'd tailgate and go to games with. It just never felt great. And now being old enough to look back and having read every issue of Gold and Black Illustrated as a student intern about this era, the things off the field were snowballing. You had Garrett Bushong and his infamous rant in the Purdue Exponent. You had Kyle Ingram, a really promising wideout who had academic issues. and wasn't able to be around. You had a lot of academic issues. You had Selwyn Lyman, one of your highest rated recruits of all time, never gets to live up to his potential due to some incidents off the field with firearms. You have Kyle Williams, kind of the highest rated player to ever play at Purdue, who had as abhorrent of an off the field incident as you could imagine, one that he remains in prison for. And during this period, Purdue wasn't beating the teams that it wasn't supposed to. Like in 2006, Purdue went and won 8 games, but every ranked team it played, it lost to. And most of them were not in particularly competitive fashion. I remember watching the Champs Sports Bowl against Maryland, and Purdue loses at 24-7, and it felt worse. Purdue was just so non-competitive in that game. That was coming off of the Hawaii debacle. At this point in time, this was when the Big Ten, for those unfamiliar, the Big Ten had a deal with Hawaii that during conference championship week, one team per year would fly out to Hawaii to go play the Rainbow Warriors. Problem was, Hawaii was good at this time. Like, this was the year before it went undefeated and went to the Sugar Bowl when it got curb stomped by Georgia. But this was Colt Brennan Hawaii. This wasn't far after Timmy Chang Hawaii. This was June Jones. They were high flying, man. Purdue goes out there, it loses after it beats Indiana. So you're 8-4. You go out there and lose. Salty feeling. Then you lose a bowl game, and you end the year on such a bad note, even though you won 8 games. And then 2007 was just more of the same. Because you started out strong. You did. Purdue was 5-0. It hadn't played a great opponent yet. It went to Minnesota and won at the old Metrodome. It beat Notre Dame at Ross-Ade Stadium. A bad Notre Dame team. I believe that was freshman Jimmy Clausen or sophomore Jimmy Clausen maybe. Notre Dame wasn't particularly good. And Purdue beats them. Great. It's the last time Purdue's beaten Notre Dame. Ohio State comes in. A big night game. I think, if I recall, Brent Musburger and Kirk Herbstreit were there doing the call, and Purdue laid an egg. It scored on the last play of the game to get the goose egg off the board. Loses 23-7. It goes to November with a 7-2 record, but then it loses all 3 in November, including that loss at Indiana. And what's really remembered is the Terry Hepner Memorial game, because Indiana won that game to clinch a bowl game the season that Terry Hepner had passed away the summer before. And you add it all up. Purdue closes so poorly. And then it gets to go to Detroit to the Music City Bowl, and it beats Central Michigan, but it was 51-48. And Dan Lefevre was a good quarterback at Central Michigan, but not that good. Not 48 points allowed good. And even though Purdue had won 16 games in 2 years, there wasn't a lot of momentum that the program had built. And that was for a variety of reasons. Look, this was a time, and we'll get to it more as we go, that Purdue had not invested in football at a really high level. Joe Tiller had lost a lot of staffers. Purdue was behind in the facilities race. This wasn't all Joe Tiller's doing, but with his age getting up there, it was harder and harder to recruit. Purdue was not recruiting as well as it had, and some of the better players it had brought in hadn't panned out. We've talked about some of the off-the-field stuff that was, I don't want to say rampant, but certainly noteworthy around Purdue at the time. And that's when the decision was made to go the coach in waiting route and to semi-force Joe Tiller out the door. Again, I don't know how much of this was Joe Tiller's decision. I've always understood it that he wanted to coach the 2009 team. And as I've always understood it, Joe Tiller would have preferred Brock Spack to be his successor. As we know now, that didn't happen. As smooth as the coach in waiting plan was for Purdue basketball, it just didn't work as smoothly in football. And this is why you don't see it a ton anymore. This was the thing in college sports in the 2000s, and there's a reason you don't see it much anymore. It's hard to pull off. And Purdue's 2008 season was its worst under Joe Tiller. It was only the second season of his 12 that he missed a bowl game. It just never took off. Curtis Painter was beat up a little bit. Purdue lost a heartbreaker against Oregon early on. Double overtime, triple overtime. It just never went well. It lost up at Notre Dame. It didn't go well. And who could forget in November? Purdue beat Michigan. The hook and ladder. Justin Siller at quarterback, man. A wild game that was. I think it was Desmond Tardy on the receiving end of the hook and ladder. Joe Tiller got to go out on a high note when Purdue just dismantled Indiana, 62-10, a splattering. And he gave a very nice speech after the game, one that I think a lot of people remember, and one that no one knew at the time, but would be the last sellout of Ross-Ade Stadium until 2017. At that point, it was Danny Hope's time, and it just never took off. 2009 was a weird season because that roster was better than a 5-7 team would make you think, but things really snowballed early on. In week 2, Purdue went out to Oregon, and it almost beat a team that played in the Rose Bowl that year. And the team that Oregon played in the Rose Bowl, Purdue did beat. But Purdue came home and it lost to Northern Illinois, a game it had no business losing. And then you have the infamous Notre Dame game. Under the lights at Ross-Ade, Danny Hope calls an ill-fated timeout. Notre Dame's in goal to go. Jimmy Clausen hits Kyle Rudolph, I believe it was. Notre Dame wins the game. And that just stuck from there. Purdue loses a couple more games, and it's 1-5 and somehow beats number 7 Ohio State. That was Terrell Pryor. That was a really good Buckeye team. It was the Buckeye team that was slinging merchandise for tattoos. It was a really good Ohio State team that Purdue beat fair and square. It forced a bunch of turnovers. It was a weird season, man. Purdue goes up to Michigan and wins. One of the few times Purdue has won in Ann Arbor in program history. Certainly one of the few times that it could have been seen on color television. I kind of remember, I think it was Ralph Bolden had a big game up there. But 2009 didn't get things started on the right note. And a lot of the hope for 2010 centered around Robert Marve, who was a big deal. He had some baggage to him from Miami, but he was immensely talented out of high school. He won Mr. Football in Florida. He had redshirted in 2009. He would have had to sit out anyways, but he got hurt. And then 4 games into the year, he tears his ACL again. The same ACL that he tore the year before. And at that point, Purdue was running what was more or less a read option offense with Rob Henry at quarterback. It had some early success. Purdue won a game at Northwestern. I think Northwestern was ranked for that. It took down Minnesota in the infamous game that word got out that Robbie Hummel tore his ACL. We talked a lot about that last week. And Purdue was 4-2 at that point, but it ended up losing out. It went off the rails. I remember watching Sean Robinson have to play quarterback against Wisconsin, and it went beyond poorly. And then he got moved to linebacker. It was a season just derailed by injuries, and it was another step backwards. And then 2011 and 12, there's not a lot of differentiator in memory. Purdue could never decide on a quarterback between Robert Marve and Caleb Turbush. Neither of them were wildly effective. Purdue's offense was very bland. A lot of bubble screens to Antavian Edison and O.J. Ross and Gary Bush. Akeem Shavers and Akeem Hunt were good, not great running backs. Raheem Mostert wasn't being utilized particularly well. Purdue was just bland. Purdue didn't have a lot going for it. You know, I remember like 2011, Purdue has to block a field goal to hold on against Middle Tennessee State in the opener. And then the next week, it has its own game-winning field goal blocked at Rice. Why Purdue played at Rice, who knows? That Purdue scheduling has always been special, man. A lot of blocked kicks in 2011, though, because Purdue blocked an extra point to force overtime against Ohio State. and beat Luke Fickell's Buckeyes the year that Jim Tressel was fired in the summer for covering up the tattoo scandal. And Purdue finishes 6-6. It wins in Bloomington to get there, goes to the Little Caesars Bowl and beats Western Michigan. And it wasn't exactly a thrilling moment. It didn't inspire tremendous confidence entering 2012. And even though Purdue almost pulled one off in South Bend against the Manti Te'o Notre Dame team that played for a national title, the season fell apart on it after September. Purdue was 3-1. It had a bit of a concerning win over Marshall to close out September. It was like 51-41. And it was a decent Marshall team, but I don't think you ever feel good about giving up 41 points. And you saw why the next week, because Purdue gets rolled by Michigan. And then Wisconsin comes into town and Purdue gets drilled. Penn State blows Purdue out in there. Purdue loses at Minnesota in there. It has a game at Ohio State that it almost won against Urban Meyer. Purdue almost wins that game. And then Purdue's 3-6, and the writing's on the wall for Danny Hope. I remember those back-to-back losses to Michigan and Wisconsin, though. Just how non-competitive Purdue was in those. And just that month of October was horrible. That was it for Danny Hope. It won the last three. Purdue became bowl eligible. And in hindsight, it's a really weird optical standpoint, knowing what we know now, that Purdue fired Danny Hope after back-to-back 6-6 seasons and being almost a 500 coach, just below it. But in Purdue's defense, at that point, there was no reason to believe that things were going to get much better. In fact, there was reason to believe things weren't trending particularly well. And Purdue decides to move on from Danny Hope after it beats Indiana to clinch a bid to the Heart of Dallas Bowl, which became one of the biggest blowouts you'll ever see until the Darrell Hazel and Ryan Walters eras redefined what blowouts are. Coaching searches are always fascinating, and I don't know where Darrell Hazel was on Purdue's list of candidates. I don't think he was high up. Butch Jones from Cincinnati said no. He wound up taking the Tennessee job. Purdue settles in on Hazel, and I don't know who else was super strongly considered. And Purdue was hoping that someone that was an Ohio State guy could help build something like that. And it did not go well. He won the press conference. He rolled in a three-piece suit. He had his player's manual that was going to be his program's Bible. Ticket sales were high. Optimism was there. They had a rally on Monument Circle on the team's way to Cincinnati for the season opener. And then it just fell apart, man. Purdue got blown out in that second half. It was about 800 degrees at Nippert Stadium that day, and Cincinnati blows Purdue out. Purdue comes home and needs a late interception to beat Indiana State, and that was all the winning Purdue would do in 2013. A 20-14 win over the mighty Sycamores. Not great. Purdue almost beat Notre Dame, but then the rest of the year it was awful. I could go on and on about these 4 years of Purdue football, but there's no point. There was some talent at quarterback, but Purdue never had an offensive identity. You look at Austin Appleby and Danny Etling, who go on to have moderate success in the SEC. Appleby at Florida, Etling at LSU. By no means were they Tua Tagovailoa and Peyton Manning, but they were all right. David Blau comes in as another Elite 11 guy, and he wound up having a really nice career under Brom. But for Darrell Hazel, it was probably a good thing for him that this all happened during an athletic director transition for Purdue. This was when Morgan Burke was on his way out, and there wasn't going to be a firing after 2015. Purdue went from 1-11 to 3-9. So you weren't firing him after 2014, but then Purdue goes 2-10 in 2015. The writing's on the wall, but you're not having Morgan Burke make a hire on the way out. So Purdue runs it back. Purdue does win a couple games, has a wild win at Illinois, has a humiliating 50-7 loss at Maryland in one of the just most disgusting Purdue performances I've ever seen. And it was a home loss at Iowa that was the final nail in the coffin. I remember leaving early so that my dad and I could get back to Warsaw so we could watch the Cubs-Dodgers game 1 of the NLCS that night. And it was over. It just, you left that stadium, I think it was 42-7 at halftime. It was homecoming, but no one came home for it. There was no one there. And it was over. And I'm sitting on the couch the following day. I'm getting ready to turn the Bears on, and I see the tweet that Purdue's got a press conference, and that was it. That was it for Darrell Hazell, and Darrell Hazell finished with a 9-33 record, 3-24 in Big Ten games. Not good. Not good at all. And Purdue was going into another coaching search with a ton of questions about the program. How committed really was Purdue? Because remember, until 2017, there were no lights installed at Ross-Ade Stadium. If TV wanted to put a game at night, then Purdue would rent lights. But come on. The Kozich Football Performance Complex was being built, or it had just finished being built. That was much needed. But when you looked at Ross-Ade Stadium and the game day atmosphere, it was a little dilapidated. The south end zone didn't look particularly good. It was innovative for a couple years to have a beer garden there, but the video board in the south end zone and the little scoreboard in the north end zone were 20 years outdated. But when it hired Jeff Brom, it felt like a strong hire. It felt like one that made a lot of sense. And that's half the battle sometimes. Does your hire make sense? Because we can look, there are hires that don't make a lot of sense and they don't usually work out. But immediately, things were different. The season opener against Louisville was really something. Taking Lamar Jackson's Cardinals down to the wire in Indianapolis. Purdue was like a 28-point underdog in that. It was at least 21. And it takes it down to the wire. Has the ball with a chance to tie and ends up turning it over on downs. But you knew that something was different. And 2017 turned out to be a blast of a season. In hindsight, it could have been so much better. There were a few losses that are frustrating, but my goodness, to go out of nowhere and make a bowl game. Purdue goes to Missouri and wins 35-3. And yes, that was Barry Odom, but Purdue goes over there and wins 35-3. That was a really nice Purdue defense under Nick Holt that season. And there were lowlights. Purdue loses 14-12 at Rutgers, the game that finally ended the Wheel of Quarterbacks deal. Purdue loses late at home to Nebraska on a Tanner Lee late touchdown drive, I believe. But when Purdue beat Indiana, after 4 straight losses in the series to clinch bowl eligibility, you couldn't dream of a better 6-6 season. And then Purdue goes out and wins the Foster Farms Bowl in dramatic fashion. And it gets even more dramatic after the game when you find out that Elijah Sindelar had been playing on a torn ACL. And that David Blau versus Elijah Sindelar debate was a real one. That was a real one. And it might have cost Purdue the first 2 games in 2018. Sindelar threw, I believe, 3 interceptions in the season opener against Northwestern when Rondale Moore put himself on the map and Purdue lost. Purdue has the rain-soaked loss to Eastern Michigan, but it was as exciting of a 6-6 season as you'll ever see in 2018 because Purdue starts 0-3. And that third loss, David Blau sets the Purdue passing record, single game, and Purdue still loses. But Purdue ends up going 6-6. It beats 3 ranked teams at Ross-Ade. It beats Ohio State in just an unforgettable game, possibly the most iconic game in Ross-Ade Stadium history when you factor in the Tyler Trent story being on College Game Day that morning and everything that went into that and the story that was produced on ESPN. It was remarkable. And it was a strange season. Purdue had to win down in Bloomington to go to a bowl game, and it did. And we don't need to talk too much about that bowl game. But at the end of the year, it felt like Purdue was headed in the right direction. And then Jeff Brom turned down the Louisville job for the first time it came open. And look, there are going to be a ton of opinions about the way the Jeff Brom tenure went and the way it ended at Purdue. I will always maintain this. He didn't have to do that. Purdue gave him a pretty significant raise. Purdue knew it didn't want to lose him. But he didn't come back to Purdue for the money. He came back to Purdue because he felt like he needed to stay for more than 2 years. And that was a massive win for Purdue. It was one that paid off a couple of years down the road, more than anything, because that 2019 class was a really good one. It might have fallen apart had Brom left, but instead, he got to develop that group into a really strong squad. The problem was they had to play earlier than he would have hoped because 2019 was just an injury-plagued year. Lorenzo Neal never came back after tearing his ACL in the 2018 bucket game. Marcus Bailey got hurt really early. You had the Week 4 loss to Minnesota when Elijah Sindelar and Rondale Moore got hurt on the same play. Jack Plummer wasn't ready to play yet. Aiden O'Connell got thrown in late in the year and did well. But it was a lost season at that point. And you get the shining star of games that should have never been scheduled. Purdue goes out to Nevada. It's like 95 degrees. You're in the altitude. Purdue's up 24-7 at halftime. Purdue's the better team. Everyone can see it. But you've got these guys from Indiana that get gassed out there, and Nevada hits a field goal from the other side of the equator to win it. I don't know. That season was frustrating because Purdue was very close to being really good. I mean, to being better, to being 6-6 at least. You had a double overtime loss against Indiana to close the year, and Purdue would have gone bowling if it had won that and won at Nevada. You know, it's a tough break, but a lot of young guys got a lot of experience, and it paid dividends in 2021 and 22. 2020 was a strange year. The only two things I'll even bring up from that, Jeff Brom getting COVID for the season opener was one of the more bizarre stories I can remember. He's watching the game from his house, and we'll never know how play calling was working or anything like that, but Purdue wins. And the Bob Diaco experiment was just a disaster. Thankfully for Purdue, it was only a 6-game season, so it got out of it quickly. It got out of it really quickly, and that was a positive. But, that went poorly. The season ended bad. Really a snowball effect. Those last 4 games were rough. But, Purdue had played some young guys. Purdue had a lot of that team coming back. Almost everyone came back. And Purdue made the most out of 2021. Purdue beats Iowa and beats Michigan State. And those are funny to look back on as top 5 wins, not because they should be invalidated, but it was fortunate timing more than anything. I mean, those weren't 10 of the best, they weren't in the top 10, top 15 teams in the country that year, but Purdue was legitimately good. I do wonder what that Notre Dame game could have been had Aiden O'Connell played the whole game instead of Jack Plummer. Plummer was not a bad quarterback, but Purdue was not going to win that game playing as conservatively as it did on offense. Aiden O'Connell was at least going to let it rip. He's still that way in the NFL. Purdue had a rain-soaked loss to Minnesota on homecoming in gold uniforms, yay. Purdue had another non-competitive home loss to Wisconsin, but it went 8-4. David Bell put together a phenomenal season. Purdue had a really nice defense that year. George Karlaftis was good. Kydron Jenkins was good. God, it's crazy that he was still there last year, and he had like 5 sacks on that 2021 team. The COVID year was a hell of a drug. Marvin Grant, Jalen Alexander, Cam Allen, Corey Trice. I think Dedrick Mackey was around for that. That was a good Purdue team, man. That was a really good Purdue team. The Music City Bowl win over Tennessee. Wild game. But Purdue had its best season since 2007. And then Aiden O'Connell announces that he was going to use his COVID year. Optimism was really high. It was too high. I remember being on here for the 2022 preview episode saying Purdue was going to go 8-4, and people got on me a lot. And I think that's the only year I've actually gotten Purdue's record right. But there were a lot of folks telling me I was too low on Purdue. And the 10-win thought, the team wasn't that good. The team before that, the 21 team, they both went 8-4. The 21 team was a better team than the 22 team. The 22 team had a fortuitous schedule where it didn't play Ohio State, it didn't play Michigan, it got Penn State week 1 at home. Purdue loses that game late, it loses at Syracuse late, and it has to hang on to beat Florida Atlantic without Aiden O'Connell. It wasn't feeling good, but Purdue cobbled it together, man. It cobbled together a nice year. Charlie Jones became a superstar out of nowhere. Purdue went up to Minnesota and beat a ranked Minnesota team. It was a year where there was a lot of hope, and then it went down, and then it was back up, and then it went back down because Purdue had won some games. It beat Minnesota, it beat Nebraska, maybe someone else, and then it goes to Wisconsin and gets beat. But then you're back up because Purdue had beaten Illinois, the Ryan Walters Illinois team that was actually pretty good. And then it beats Northwestern in a freezing cold game. And it beats Indiana to win the Big Ten West after it backs in there because Wisconsin lost to 3-9 Nebraska on Black Friday. And it felt like the perfect culmination of the Jeff Brom era that Purdue got to that Big Ten championship game because, look, it was Purdue's time to do it. We knew the Big Ten West wasn't going to be around much longer. Did we know that USC and UCLA were joining the Big Ten at that point? I can't remember. But it was the perfect culmination. And yes, after Purdue's loss to Michigan, the Louisville job opened. I remember pulling into my office at WLFI in Lafayette that Monday morning and getting the Twitter notification that Scott Satterfield had taken the Cincinnati job. Undoubtedly, he was pushed to do so by Louisville because there were rumors after 2021 that Louisville was looking to dump Satterfield and go get Brom. And, the urban legend, so to speak, is that Louisville dumped its president because the president wouldn't greenlight that. Brom had the touchdown club deal in Louisville in the summer of 22, when he certainly didn't say no. And it became inevitable. And I remember coming on this podcast that summer, telling my listeners, hey, enjoy this season because it might be Jeff Brom's last at Purdue. I never viewed this as a bad thing from Jeff Brom. I know there are some folks who were really upset by it, and you're entitled to feel however you would like. It's up to you. I don't think Jeff Brom was really looking to leave Purdue. I think he was looking to go home, to go back to a city where he and his family are royalty. He did everything he was asked to do at Purdue. You could argue he did about everything you could do at Purdue. Could you have built more sustained success? Yes, but the highs he reached, very good. That pull to go back to Louisville was going to win out eventually because it was more than just a Jeff Brom himself decision. Since Jack Mollenkopf left Purdue at the conclusion of the 1969 season, Purdue has had 3 of its 11 coaches finish their time at Purdue with a winning record. Jeff Brom is one of those 3. Was he perfect? No. Did he leave the program in a better place than he found it? Absolutely. But the search was on at that point. And as I said, coaching searches are always fascinating. The Ryan Walters one was strange. You'll never convince me that Purdue wasn't prepared for Brom to leave. How on earth could you not have been? Everyone saw it coming. It wasn't a particularly well-kept secret around West Lafayette either. I lived in the community, worked in the community at that time. It wasn't a secret. Did Purdue overestimate the attractiveness of its job? Maybe. Did Purdue just fall head over heels in love with Ryan Walters? Maybe, but it never worked out. There was optimism early on. He won the press conference. He spoke boldly and brashly and very confidently. His recruiting class was very nice. Purdue went 4-8 in year one, but that team wasn't going to be good. You'd lost like 8 NFL draft picks in the last 2 years. Purdue doesn't backfill that easily. But there were reasons to believe that Purdue could improve on that. And last season could not have gone worse. The loss to Notre Dame remains the most surreal, in a bad way, football game I've watched in Ross-Ade Stadium. Just the optimism when that game started to lose that badly. To see Purdue firing the offensive coordinator in September, losing 52-6 at a Wisconsin team that didn't even make a bowl game. And then you set the record for worst loss in program history twice in the same year to your 2 in-state rivals. Now, give Purdue credit. Purdue did not waste any time here. Purdue could have kept this going for a long time, for another year. Purdue ate the $9 million and it bought Ryan Walters out and it sent him packing. And it went out. It landed a perfectly sensible hire in Barry Odom. And now it goes from here. So what's next? There are questions about the big picture, no doubt. Where can Purdue compete in an 18-team Big Ten with some real powerhouses? How does revenue sharing impact the program? Can Barry Odom be the guy? If history tells us anything, Purdue will be successful if it has strong quarterback play and it has some NFL caliber pieces on defense. There are real questions here. The last 25 years have been quite the roller coaster, but we'll see what Purdue can do here moving forward, and it starts in less than 2 months. This episode is brought to you by me. Yes, me. When I'm not watching sports, or more accurately, talking about them, I'm talking insurance with the people of Indiana. As an agent with Indiana Farm Bureau Insurance, I want to help you protect what you've worked hard to achieve. From home and auto to life and business insurance, I'm here to help you. Give me a call at 317-846-5861 or email me at jordan.jones@infarmbureau.com. Let's protect you from life's everyday risks. Guys, that's all I've got for today. Hopefully this was a fun little series for you. I know I got some really good feedback on the basketball episode. Hopefully this was fun. We've got some stuff in the works here to preview football. Need another topic or two to talk about. Send me what you want to hear me discuss on Twitter at BoilersBeyond. Email boilersandbeyondpod@gmail.com. We'll talk to you soon, guys. Until then, take care.